It isn't a secret that the creation of Twilight Princess was as a result of the reaction to The Wind Waker. The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker was the GameCube's de facto Zelda game that spanned across a large ocean, set as a sequel of the ever-acclaimed Ocarina of Time, while standing out most for its tuned cel-shaded visuals. The game was met with critically high reception for its strong gameplay, stunning visuals, to the point of where the director of The Wind Waker, Eiji Aonuma, was set to make a sequel, once called The Wind Waker 2. But yet, that never flourished. What happened to the sequel? What was the premise of this game? And does any of this still exist? Today, we shall explore the mystery of the cancelled Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker 2. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button and hit the like button too to further support us and keep creating new videos. After the release of The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker on the GameCube, the world had absorbed and took in all that the game offered. Many had come to enjoy the game as a worthy entry, while many others also had hope that the tuned visuals were one and done, and a more realistic art style was on its way. These questions were quickly answered, as Wind Waker's producer, Shigeru Miyamoto, had announced that the next Zelda game would indeed be retaining the tuned visuals, with Nintendo shortly after even announcing a new Zelda game to come in just a year. While the public didn't know what this game was for sure, but the obvious answer that it indeed was going to be a follow-up to where the Wind Waker left off, on Tetra and Link looking for a new Hyrule. Eiji Aonuma was back with the Wind Waker team to continue on the sequel. While cel shading was set to stay despite the protest, this wasn't something that Eiji Aonuma understood on how loud the voices were, and instead looked at what people disliked about the gameplay itself. This mainly came down to the water, sailing to be specific. As Aonuma stated, many players found the sea travel tedious, so for the sequel, we were going to focus on horseback and land-based exploration. This as such would work well for that very ending that they were following up, as Link would have arrived on this new land. But being that it was a land-based game, Link was set to get his mighty stallion back, Epona. All chibi and cel-shaded now. This was where the team was puzzled on how they should depict Link riding Epona. Link in The Wind Waker had stubby feet and short arms that would make him ill-suited for riding a horse. So as a result, the idea came of aging Link up in order to give him longer limbs. Going back to the old concept arts they had for The Wind Waker, where the team explored ideas of an older Toon Link. However, an adult Link like in Ocarina of Time wasn't one that the team thought would fit this art style either, so they came up with an in-between, a more teenage Link, which as Eiji Aonuma would state, we wanted to grow Link up a little bit. Not quite an adult, but someone with more responsibility. As a result, what was made was a more mature Link, but not too mature, that would lead to it clashing with the art style. Just enough to ride a horse, and this as such led to the horseback combat being brought back into the fold, a concept that just couldn't be done back on the Nintendo 64, but now possible. But aside from that, other elements were being designed simultaneously. Design manager Satoru Takizawa was working on a goblin-like character. As he stated, the appearance looks like a monster or child. Can't tell if she's enemy or ally. Can't really tell what she's thinking. Sometimes selfish, but sometimes cute and naive. While Takizawa has described this being for a secret project that was being worked on directly before the development of Twilight Princess, the character very much looking like a variation of the Bokoblin or Mini-Blin in many ways, let alone having proportions matching perfectly with characters from The Wind Waker. But all in all, the character was one Link would constantly encounter in this new unexplored land, and with how much thought was being put into her, she was set to be a very prominent character. However, while they were still planning and designing this character, a model of Tetra was being used, but with her colors inversed into a dark Tetra as a placeholder. And this development would continue throughout 2003 and into early 2004, where everything was about to change. And soon it was GDC 2004 in late March. Eiji Aonuma was holding a presentation on the evolution of The Legend of Zelda. Within that very meeting, he presented a timeline of the game's releases in the franchise. What was to note, and to a surprise to many, was the appearance of the Wind Waker 2 at the very bottom. This did not sit well with Wind Waker haters. Not only had they heard that the next Zelda game was going to be cel-shaded by Miyamoto previously, but now an actual sequel to the very game too, bringing on dreaded fears, including more Child Link and especially sailing. Despite much of that actually not being the case, fans had a grim outlook on the future that was the Wind Waker 2. And so with GDC wrapped up, development of the Wind Waker 2 was to progress. However, Eiji Onuma soon took note of the Wind Waker's reception. Onuma was surprised to discover that the sales had become this sluggish in North America, despite the bigger market. Not understanding why, he asked Nintendo of America why this was the case. What he was told was that people simply did not like the toon art style and gave the impression that it was a game for children, thus alienating typical teenage audiences of the series. Worse was that Zelda's main market was in North America, especially since Japan was less and less into gaming at that point due to the then popular gamer drift. Without North America, the series just wasn't in a healthy spot. Onuma soon began to worry for this very Wind Waker sequel and how it could tank in sales, let alone, if this same thing happened again, it could even inevitably kill Zelda. It became clear what had to happen, and it was to simply give the Western fans exactly what they were asking for, a means for the series to survive. As such, Eiji Onuma approached producer Shigeru Miyamoto and stated, "I want to make a realistic Zelda." While Miyamoto was skeptical at first, he accepted, with the instruction of doing what they couldn't do in Ocarina of Time. Already, this was something they had dabbled into with the introduction of the horseback combat, but was now to be tuned up to 10, along with a proper adult solution to Link on a horse. Instead of hitting an absolute reset button, a lot of work had already been done, and to start over would be an absolute waste. Instead, they took the Wind Waker 2's engine and began to convert it into a more realistic one, turning off the toon shaders and setting it back to the default gradient shading. Being that the fans and even Miyamoto were pushing for an Ocarina of Time influenced game, the story was now to be completely rewritten and removing the Wind Waker connection. This idea was to actually make it a sequel of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, a third game featuring the hero of time, now grown up, after last facing the moon. But with how hardwired the team was to the idea of a toon Zelda game, they needed to change their way of thinking, and for that, they decided on making the plot around Link turning into a wolf. And while much of the plot was changing, a lot of the ideas they were already formulating were also going to be converted or outright carried over, including that goblin character. The character was now going to be named as Midna, and would continue to play that character where you couldn't put your finger on her motives, while being given her final design that would fit better with the new darker story involving these creatures called the Twilight. But while many of the remnants of that era of the Wind Waker 2 never were used, some of it did stay into the data to give us a better idea of what might have been carried over. Whether it be bombs in the Wind Waker style, the Nega Tetra, and even the Wind Waker itself. Along with that, a newly made toon Hylian Loach was discovered, something that never appeared in the Wind Waker. This was a fish that one would catch in a fishing minigame in what was to be this new realistic Zelda game, which would indicate that this fishing minigame may have started out during the Wind Waker 2, but carried over. Within a month, the team had made massive progress, and E3 2004 was coming up. Shigeru Miyamoto wanted to show this off. And so rolled around E3 2004, where Nintendo had a grand press conference showing much of their new GameCube games, including Metroid Prime 2 and Resident Evil 4, along with their first showing of the Nintendo DS. But as the show was coming to an end, the rising star Reggie Fils-Aimé had this to say.
Before you leave, I'd like you to step inside one more world for Nintendo GameCube.
And the audience just erupted in cheers and joy to see everything that they thought they were about to get be reversed. It was dark, it was gritty, blades will bleed, and adult, and biggest of all, it was realistic. Onuma in this case had no idea that this was even going to be shown off. And in fact, someone on staff had played what was made, recorded it, and edited this trailer together. In fact, when both Miyamoto and Onuma were asked after about how far development had gone on for, Onuma's answer simply was, at this point, we've got the engine running and everything's working, and it's a matter of plugging in and putting in the finishing pieces. In other words, this was literally everything they could get done in just a month span of converting the Wind Waker 2 to this new realistic Zelda game, but yet still had to build the actual story, structures, objects, and cast. Regardless, Onuma's gamble had proven correct, and people were never more excited for Zelda than this. And so the team continued on in this new game being made from the ashes of the Wind Waker 2, called The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. And eventually, that very game was released on November 2006, and at that time became the best-selling Zelda game with nearly 9 million copies sold, something that likely wouldn't have been possible with the Wind Waker 2 had they ventured on due to the dislike of the Wind Waker's visuals at the time. But Eiji Onuma's yearning to continue the story of the Wind Waker never went away, as very shortly after completing Twilight Princess, a sequel was finally in the works. However, as the original concept, story, and ideas had already been utilized for Twilight Princess, an entirely new story was being realized that kept it well in the spirits of the Wind Waker, with sailing back and more robust than ever, while much of the focus now being more on land. The game being called The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass, continuing the story where left off with Wind Waker, Link, and Tetra returning in their search for new lands, and the story finally coming to a completion with The Legend of Zelda Spirit Tracks, which focused on the cast descendants in what was now the new Hyrule that Link and Tetra went on to discover, but now a reality, bringing a true closure to the story of the Wind Waker. While many have over the years grown to love the toon visuals, and even prefer it to Twilight Princess's visuals, not releasing this as the next major game in the series at the time may have been for the best from a business standpoint in order for the series to survive. And this cel-shaded art style eventually even overtook the series as the de facto art style as seen within games such as Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, to much acclaim and love by fans in this modern age. And thank you for watching. Hit the subscribe button for I plan to be back for more Zelda and other games gaming history and cut content soon. Hit the like button and comment below on if you would have preferred a Wind Waker 2 instead of Twilight Princess. So everyone, thank you for watching.